Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Hudson Library for our author event with former head of FBI's art crime team, Tim Carpenter. He's joining us tonight for a conversation about his recently published book, The Graverobber. Tim Carpenter is a retired FBI supervisory special agent and the former head of the FBI's art crime team. Over a 30-year career, he has led some of the Bureau's most significant cultural property investigations, recovering thousands of looted and stolen objects across the globe. He received the FBI Director's Award for Excellence in Counterterrorism and played a key role in modernizing the Bureau's approach to art crime, expanding the art crime team, and strengthening its global reach. Now the managing director of Argus Cultural Property Consultants, he advises museums, collectors, and insurers on risks, repatriation, and security. His work has been featured in the New York Times, CBS News, NPR, Vanity Fair, and the Washington Post magazine. And moderating our conversation this evening is Kabir Bhatia, the Emmy Award-nominated host of Applause on WVIZ, Cleveland's public station. He also serves as the senior arts and culture reporter at WKSU, our local NPR affiliate. Kabir has twice been honored as Ohio's best reporter by the Ohio Society of Professional Journalists and is a recipient of the prestigious Edward R. Murrow Award. Copies of The Graverobber are available for purchase tonight. If you haven't gotten your copy, Kate from the Learned Owl is in the back. You can purchase your copy this evening. And we'll have an author meet and greet following tonight's program. So please join me in welcoming Tim Carpenter and Kabir Bhatia.
Welcome to Hudson. Thanks for coming up here.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. I have to, let's see, is it on? Try.
Can you all hear me?
How is that?
Can you hear me now?
In the back?
As they say, a little closer. Okay, there we go.
We're getting thumbs up. Good.
All right.
Well, to start, before we get to the book, you've been very busy the last few days being interviewed. Tell us about that.
Do any of you know what's been going on the last couple of days? The Louvre, right? I've been pretty busy. Pardon me if I've got red eyes tonight and I need some energy drinks. It's been very little sleep, but we've been quite busy with the heist at the Louvre, and I think I've done 23 media interviews in the last 48 hours and a couple of documentaries and a couple of magazines, and they keep calling. So.
Pretty good. Well, before we move off that subject, I have to just ask one thing. As I read the coverage, it does not sound like, it sounds like a crazy heist from some 70s urban satire film. People coming in and smashing things.
Yeah.
This seemed very unusual, A, just not for that part of the world, but B, I can't imagine anything like that happening here in the U.S. It seems unreal that something like that would happen here at a museum. I'm not talking about banks, but what's the likelihood of that level of chaos in an incident like this, either there or here?
Quite high.
Quite high. Okay.
Yeah, it happens. It's happened here many times. We do have a little bit different MO, if you will, in the U.S. versus what we see in Europe, but they're not that dissimilar. One of the problems here is you do it here and you stand a good chance of getting shot, right? Because everybody here has guns. It's not really the case in Europe, so they're a little more ambitious. They're a little more aggressive in Europe than we see here. But yeah, we've got plenty of examples of, this kind of stuff happening in the U.S. It really was the heyday here was in the 80s. We don't see it so much anymore. But we can talk about that.
Sure. Well,
you want me to talk about it now?
Why don't you? Go ahead.
So, okay. A couple of things that are going on here, right, with the Louvre. There's a lot of finger pointing at the Louvre. A lot of people are upset, and how can this possibly happen at the Louvre? We thought they had this world-class security and all of these things. So let me just start by doing it this way. If I asked any of you, or I tasked any of you with, I'm going to give you $1 billion in cash, and your job is to secure it and protect it, how would you do it? Come on, don't be shy. We're going to have a conversation, y'all. Tell me, how would you do it? Wouldn't tell anybody. Okay, you're probably going to put it in a vault. You're probably going to surround it with fence, concertina wire. You're probably going to have armed guards. You're going to have cameras and security. And you're probably not going to let anybody go in and look at it. Right? Can we agree on that? Yeah. Now I'm going to say, I'm going to give you that $1 billion in cash, and you can't do any of those things. Now protect it. You have to put it into a building whose very mission is to be open to the public. Now protect it. And that's really what we're talking about, right, with the Louvre. You have over $1 billion of priceless cultural heritage. They have an impossible task. And so let's not be so quick to throw stones at them when they have a security failure. The very first question I was asked on Sunday by the press was this a catastrophic security failure at the Louvre? No. Was it a security failure? Sure. Was it catastrophic? No. This is the reality of the museum space, right? Every museum is vulnerable to crime. If you have a dedicated crew that wants to target a place, they will. And that's really all that happened here. And so the Louvre is going to learn from this. Museums across the globe are going to learn from this. You know, we try to train them, and we try to get them to think about their vulnerabilities and think like we do as criminal investigators. We see it a little bit differently than maybe a security professional does, because security people see it from a security lens, right? It's the old thing about it to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, we know how the criminals think because that's what we've done, right, for decades, is deal with those criminals and hold them accountable. So, you know, all will be well. We'll see. I hope, you know, I have a lot of optimism. If you guys have seen me on the news here the last couple of days, I keep trying to inject some optimism. My colleagues, my friends out there in the world are pretty pessimistic. Oh, these things are gone forever. We're never going to see them again. Let's not go there just yet. There's still a chance that they will successfully recover these. And so I'm optimistic that we'll get them back.
Yeah, interesting. So now, in this case, of course, it was antiquities, jewels, things of that nature. When I hear art crimes, I think of that or paintings. But as you were just saying outside, that is a sliver of what comes under the heading. So talk about some of the other things, not just what's in the book, but a lot of the other things that come under that. Maybe pieces of the White House. Yeah. I don't know. Things like that might come under the heading of cultural art that needs to be.
You're going to try to lead me down that road.
No, I'm just.
Hey, how many of you have been to the White House? And have you done the public tour at the White House? How many of you have ever been to the White House and done a behind the scenes? Okay. Many times. Have you seen?
I think I've been.
Yeah, you think so? Have you seen their collection? You know, the White House has a pretty amazing art collection there, right? So we used to go over and evaluate that collection periodically and take a look at it. You know what I was most amazed about the White House? Not on the public tour part, but just walking around the White House. It's in terrible condition. Mm. The building is really in terrible shape. Paint's peeling, wood's rotting everywhere in the building. It's like, come on, guys, this is the White House. But, you know, it's a public-funded building, right? It's funded by Congress, and so their operating budget's actually quite low, and so sometimes those maintenance issues fall aside. So the same thing happens at the Louvre, right? It happens at all of these historical places. They just don't have the budgets to keep them up and running. But anyway, I kind of digress a little bit about the White House. Yeah. But you were asking about all the different types of crime.
It's a wide array of things.
It really is. Cultural property crime is not just the stolen Van Goghs and the stolen Picassos, right? We certainly do those. That's what everybody knows us for. That's kind of, you know, our bread and butter, if you will. But the reality is it's a pretty small part of our portfolio, right? Doing theft cases, doing these museum heist cases, a pretty small part. Less than maybe 20% of our caseload was related to theft. What do you think was the most common crime that we worked? Fraud. Fakes and forgeries. Caveat emptor, right? Buyer beware. So I don't know if any of you are collectors or maybe dealers, maybe auctioneers. I don't know who's in the crowd, but if you're in the art market in any way, buyer beware. It's a very dangerous market to operate in if you don't know what you're doing. How many of you have ever bought a painting, an authentic original Picasso on QVC for $500?
all the time, right? They're all
you've
the
got
way.
a collection
I've
of
got a
those?
whole garage
How
full.
about on a cruise ship? Have any of you ever bought art on a cruise ship?
I do the air mall when I'm on a
Okay.
plane. Yeah.
Listen, be careful. The market is full of this stuff, and we work an awful lot of those cases, and poor, unsuspecting people that think I really did get an original Picasso for $5,000. You know, and these fraudsters, they're clever, right? And they know the law just as well as we do, and they know what they can say and can't say to circumvent the black and white of the law, right? So a piece, a print that says signed Picasso is not signed by Picasso, right? It means somebody signed the name Picasso on there. That doesn't make it an original painting, right? It's a fake. So this is what we spend a lot of our time doing, is chasing fakes. And it's not the $10 million fakes. It's the $5,000, the $10,000, and they kill us on volume. They're selling tens of thousands of these every year, and we just can't keep up with that.
Yeah.
So that's a big piece of it. We're talking about this case, antiquities trafficking, right? Looting is another big part of what we do. You guys might have remembered 2013, 2014, there was a problem, right, with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Remember, they were blowing up World Heritage sites. They were destroying lots of cultural heritage, but what they were less public about was they were also stealing it, right? And they were trafficking it back into the marketplace to fund their terrorism operations. So for several years, we spent quite a bit of time chasing the money around, trying to prevent terrorist acts. So we've got that problem that we deal with. Kleptocracy, right? So foreign government corruption, you know, particularly out of Russia, the oligarchs, they're all trafficking in art. They're all moving money throughout the art markets, because the art markets are kind of still the Wild West. They're kind of the last unregulated market. So they can move a lot of money in and out of the market stream. We've got sanctions evasion. China trying to avoid some of our sanctions by moving money into the United States through the art market and selling it, right? There's all kinds of problems going on there. And then money laundering, which most of my friends in the art market, particularly on the commercial side of the market, get really mad when I talk about money laundering, because they'll all say, there's no money laundering in the art market. Show of hands, how many of you believe that's true? Come on, there's
Smart
a lot of
crowd.
money laundering, lots of money laundering going on in the art market. I got quoted a few years ago. I didn't realize they were taping it for the public, or I wouldn't have said it. I'm retired now, so I can say what I want. But I said at a symposium, it was a money laundering symposium, and I got up and told the whole crowd that, well, smart criminals launder their money with art. And that's the reality of it, right? So we don't have time tonight. I could do 2 hours up here talking to you guys through money laundering schemes in the art market, but I promise it exists. It's happening. So
Yeah, of course.
long-winded answer to your question.
Well, no, that's. I mean, we had here locally, 2-3 years ago, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Someone who was there got in trouble. There was a notebook of Eagles' handwritten lyrics, a notebook from the 70s that there was money that was going to be involved, and then they found out that it was more a case of ownership. There wasn't fraud. But something like that, it's got cultural value to it, maybe not so much the monetary value, maybe not something for money laundering. And I have to think, in this case, it was almost 100% cultural value versus monetary value.
Yeah, it's such an important point that you're raising, right? It's really important to me. So when I would train new FBI agents to be art crime team agents, this was a topic that I spent a lot of time on. What do you think was the very first question I always got, whether it was FBI executives, the media, or the public, when there was a theft case? What's the very first question? What was it worth? Without fail, always. That's the question they were asking about the Louvre. Is the only thing anybody wanted to know, well, what's the value of these things? I would usually shrug and say, who cares? Priceless, worthless. Pick your poison. I don't care which one you pick. I like worthless because we don't want to incentivize this. We don't want to incentivize the criminals to keep stealing the stuff. So that's worthless.
Yeah.
It's worth what the cultural value is, what the historic value, what we can learn from it, what it means for us as human beings, and what we pass on to future generations, right? Imagine a world today without the pyramids at Giza. Imagine when the Mona Lisa was stolen. How many of you know the Mona Lisa was stolen? 1919, somebody can fact check me on that. I think it was 1919. Italian guy by the name of Perugia stole the Mona Lisa. Before it was famous, it was didn't have its own gallery at the time in the Louvre. It was on a wall in a gallery with others. He took it, disappeared for 2 years. And then, of course, he tried to ransom it back and he got caught. But imagine if at the time the French police went, it's just a painting, who cares? I mean, think about that for a minute, right? The Mona Lisa is the most viewed piece of artwork in the world. We can argue all night long whether it deserves to be or not. Who cares? It is. But look at what that's done for humanity, right, in the last 100 years. But what if they didn't care and they didn't bother to get it back? How that would have changed the course of human history, right? Protecting our cultural heritage is important. And who cares how much it's worth?
Good point. Good point. Now, a lot of this, and I'm trying not to spoil too much of the book, but it's Native. A large number of in this collection was maybe all of it Native American artifacts, right? 90% or something.
No, about
Maybe
half.
About half. Okay.
About half the collection.
Those talk about NAGPRA for people who don't know, because that really kick-started. I know you could do another 2 hours on that.
You guys all night. We talk about NAGPRA. NAGPRA, so that is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which is a mouthful, so we're just going to call that NAGPRA. NAGPRA was a federal law enacted in 1990, which is the federal government's attempt to address 200 years of misappropriation of Native American culture, right? And address the amount of improperly taken Native American culture and heritage that were housed in U.S. museums or held by U.S. institutions. So it's a very complex law. It's very poorly written, in my humble opinion. I talk about that some in the book. I have some suggestions of how to make things better. Some of them are pie in the sky. I'm not naive. They'll never happen because we have some really strange, well, not strange, we have some very unique concepts of property law in the United States because of our colonial heritage, right? That we rebelled against the King of England for a reason, right? We didn't like the fact that the crown could just come in and take whatever they wanted from us. So we have some very unique concepts of property law, and those concepts of property law complicate this issue of NAGPRA for us because NAGPRA is a federal law, which means it applies to federal lands and federal institutions, right? It provides some protections for Native American cultural heritage on federal land or tribal land because tribal land is held in trust by the government and all these things. It doesn't apply necessarily to state land or to your private property, your backyard. NAGPRA doesn't apply to that, right? Yet 95%, I'm making that number up, but you get my point, 95% of all modern tribal land today represents just a fraction of actual tribal land, indigenous lands, right? We all live on their land. And so all of these things that are on our private property don't really belong to us. Right? It's this modern concept of property rights that we have. And so it's a really difficult area. It's a really hard topic to get your head wrapped around. And these concepts of who owns what, and or do we continue to exploit indigenous populations by taking and stealing their cultural heritage and turning it for profit or making spectacles out of it. And that's what I address a lot in this book because that's really what was going on in this case with Mr. Miller.
Now, Mr. Miller, the sense I get is that he was in 89, 90 when...
91.
91, and a decade ago is about when this happened.
Yep.
He didn't seem to feel that anything incorrect had been done in his archaeology, or did he? Like, what was his demeanor? Because at one point, there's wearing a wire, and there's all sorts of the intrigue you'd expect in any crime story, but you might not expect in a case with a 91-year-old man and Native American remains.
Yeah. So, again, spoiler stuff. We won't give you too much of the book, but Mr. Miller was an avid collector in Indiana. He had spent 60 years amassing this really enormous collection. It was the largest we had ever encountered, and some of it was perfectly legal, as you expect with any of these collections, but much of the collection was extremely problematic, right? He had done quite a bit of looting and digging himself, and was more than happy to talk to me about that and tell me all these great stories about how he dug this up on this reservation, or he was over here and he was stealing it out of this crypt, or he was doing all kinds of crazy things. I'll let you all read the book. But, he, on one hand, I don't think he really perceived of it as he was doing anything wrong, but psychologically that kind of makes sense, right? We have to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror every day we wake up, right? And even really good people can do bad things. We know this, right? Our neighbors are doing bad things, and we love them anyway. It's just the human condition. Mr. Miller was just human. He was just a guy that had done some pretty horrible things, but psychologically, he tuned that part out, right, and fancied himself an amateur archaeologist, and the same arguments we get from pot hunters and we hear from looters all the time is, we're preserving this history. If we don't dig it up, it's just going to be lost. It's going to be eroded at the riverbank. Well, maybe it's not your responsibility to do that. Maybe, just maybe, this indigenous culture, when they buried their loved ones and they placed these objects into the ground of them, maybe they never intended for you to come along and dig it up. How about that?
Good point.
When you bury your loved ones today in current burial rituals, and we place watches or family effects or jewelry or whatever with them, you do so with the assumption that some jerk's not going to come along in 50 years or 70 years and dig them up and take them home and stick them in on a shelf in their house, right? Can we all agree on that? It's unconscionable. This is at the core of this case. This is really not even an art crime case. This is a human rights case, right? This is about human dignity. And that's the piece that Mr. Miller really didn't seem to comprehend. There's a quote in the book, and I've been quoted, Vanity Fair and all these outlets that have done pieces on this. The one interaction I had with him, it was just a gut punch for me, was he got really mad the first day we were removing all the human remains out of his property, and he came to me and said, well, I don't understand why you're taking all of my Indians. And again, I don't want to give too much of the book away. I'll let you all read it. But we were there on consent. We had a warrant, but we didn't want to execute the warrant. And there's some legal reasons. I talk about it. You'll understand when you read about why we wanted to be on consent. But when you're on consent, right, as Americans, you should all know this. Right, the Constitution protects you from people like me, and you want that protection. You want the protection from the FBI. You want us to have to do all of the legal hurdles, to have probable cause. This is what makes our system work. So you can revoke consent. You can give me consent to come in and take legal action, but you can also revoke that consent at any moment, right, and force me to go and do all these things, go to a judge and do all those things. So from a criminal investigator's perspective, if I've got consent, then I'm going to be really nice to you, right? Because I don't want you to revoke consent. That just makes my job that much harder. So we're going to be really good friends. We're going to play nice. I'm going to hug you. I'm going to pat you on the knee, and we're all going to get along. So we're really trying to do that with Mr. Miller. So when he comes to me and he's mad, and he's like, I don't understand, why are you taking my Indians? This is one of those moments where you really just have to ground yourself, like, okay, don't say anything, don't say anything. Like, I got to play nice, but I'm really angry because this is a terribly offensive thing to say to somebody. So I looked at him and said, well, Don, we told you that the human remains were our number one priority. When we triaged this property, we're going to collect the human remains. I said to him, some people might consider what you've done to be highly offensive and immoral and criminal and a problem. And he sat and he looked at me for a minute, and he just kind of huffed, and he said, well, and this is offensive, y'all, I apologize, trigger alert. He said to me, well, if it's just a bunch of dead Indians that make you squeamish, then go ahead and take them. And I think for the first time in my adult life, that was the moment I really understood the term racism. We use that word a lot today, and we use it poorly most of the time these days. But that's what it really means. Because to Don Miller, these human beings, and they weren't all Native American. We had remains of folks that were Caucasian. We had from all over the world.
All over the world. Yeah.
They weren't people. These were just things. They had no moral equivalency for him than the pot or the mortar and pestle did. So I was pretty angry with him in that moment, and I couldn't help myself, so I just looked at him and said, okay, Don, well, if that's the way you feel about it, you don't mind if I go down to the cemetery down the road and go dig your grandparents up, take them home, stick a bump on my mantle. Well, he got mad because, well, wait, that's not the same thing. Wait, no, hold on. You can't go down and dig up my grandparents out of the cemetery. That's not okay. But it's fine to go out in the field, or it's fine to go into the burial cave, or it's fine to go into the crypts and steal those people. Not okay to go and pull them up out of the ground in the casket at the local church. Fascinating psychology, right? And this is something that as Americans we need to think about, and we need to have these conversations and be talking about this concept of manifest destiny that we have. It's really not okay.
Clearly, you're a student of history. What sparked that? We talked. You grew up in Knoxville, and then I know you were a police officer, and then FBI. Fill in the blanks there, where you talked about the psychological piece that maybe Mr. Miller had turned off. In your case, what was it that turned on this? I'm assuming a love of history, not just something I got to learn for my job.
Yeah, no, I think certainly there was a passion there. I think you'll find that with most art crime team agents, right? You might imagine we recruit people that understand the reason that we do this work. I grew up wanting to be an artist, even as a little kid. I always had chalk and pencils and paint, and I was painting all the way up, and really envisioned that future for myself to go be an artist. And so I was working on a scholarship to go back in the day. It's not there anymore, but the Memphis College of Art. I'm from Tennessee, so it made sense to me at the time. But a little thing called Desert Storm happened, and duty called, and so I enlisted, and life went that way.
Yeah.
And so I set down my pens and paintbrushes and left the art world behind, which is really fortunate for all of you all, because I was never any good. Was never any good at it. But no, I enjoyed doing it. And then life went full circle. Who knew? There's no way to predict that. Years later, I find myself in the FBI, and I think like most of you, I really didn't know at the time the FBI even looked at art cases. But I was a young, brand new agent. I had been a police officer for a while, and had been in the military for a while. And of course, you might imagine the moment I find out that the Bureau does this work, I wasn't even really just throwing my hand up. I really was like shoving my way to the front of the line and pushing everybody like, I'm doing that.
Yeah.
And they were gracious enough to let me do it. But, I get kidded a lot because the military trained me to be a bomb technician. So I was an explosive ordnance disposal technician, disarming bombs for a living. So it's really this strange juxtaposition, right? And then, of course, people hear me talk, and they're like, wait a minute, where are you from? When I would get introduced as the head of the FBI's art crime team, and then I'd start talking, everybody would start laughing. Like, why are you laughing?
Oh, no.
Well, it's the Southern accent.
Sure.
Like, this country kid from Tennessee is running the art program,
Well,
but,
obviously you did a good job.
Yeah.
And thank you for your service.
well, thank you.
Yeah.
But that's the reason. And so,
Interesting.
of course, I had that passion. It just calls to me, right, to go and protect our cultural heritage.
Interesting. Well, I think we've got a few minutes left. We always open it up for questions if that's good for. I probably should
Fire
have checked with
away.
you before. Yeah, you don't seem nervous about taking questions. Do we have right here?
That's right. Sure. So for those of you in the back, so the question is, in the book, I talk about how Mr. Miller and his wife would infiltrate legitimate permitted archaeological digs in order to carry out some of their clandestine digging activities. And so that, to describe that just a little bit, that's actually far more common than you might think. So if you think about universities and other institutions that are going out and doing permitted archaeological digs, and let's be clear, there's a big difference between what a pot hunter like Miller does and what an archaeologist does. I know a lot of archaeologists. I don't know very many that would dig a test pit with a backhoe, right? So there's your first clue that there's a difference. If they're digging with a bulldozer or a backhoe, that's not archaeology, right? That's looting. But many of these looters and these pot hunters will go out on these permitted archaeological digs. So a lot of these permitted digs will bring volunteers from the community. All of you have an opportunity to go out and sign up in the summer and go dig. Well, what better way to find out where the loot is than to go out on an authorized dig in the summer, and then when they're packed up at the end of the summer and the kids are going back to college and the professors are back in the classroom teaching, you just go out there to the site and loot the snot out of it. It happens a lot. And so this is what we would see, that they would do that kind of stuff.
Interesting. Oh, we've got Mr. Curran.
Thank you both very much for this engaging conversation. But Agent Carpenter, this is a community that enjoys a lot of art. We have art shows, we have art galleries in town, and we have people who do love art and put it on their walls. What is your astute advice for us to protect ourselves from, as best we can, from fraud?
From fraud. Okay, so the question is, the best advice to protect yourself from fraud, specifically. So as I said, caveat emptor, right? You have to be very careful and very knowledgeable. It's basic stuff. If it sounds too good to be true, it is, right? You can't buy this original Picasso or original Renoir painting for $500. You just can't. It's really a hard question to answer with specificity because, the fraud schemes run the gamut. I mean, we could talk all night long, whether it's Inigo Philbrick. Anybody familiar with that case? We arrested Mr. Philbrick a few years ago in the middle of COVID. I had to send a plane to Vanuatu to get him. This poor kid thought because we didn't have an extradition treaty, we couldn't get him. Well, he was wrong. But, he's back at it again. He's trying to get back into dealing today. But, he was just charismatic, right? And so when we look at fraudsters, right, this is really the MO of a fraudster. They're charismatic, right? They relate to you and they pull you in. And he was able to dupe victims out of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? We charged him with this much. He did this much, but sometimes it's hard to charge that crime. That's probably not a great answer for you, but you just always assume that you're a victim. I talk about this a lot, the victim mindset. It's normal. It's human to have the victim mindset, but we all have the victim mindset, and that is, that'll never happen to me. Do you think the Louvre had the victim mindset? Of course they did. Institutions can have it, but we all have it. It'll never happen to me until it does. So don't be the victim. Just always assume that you're the victim and approach a deal in that way. So
Interesting.
okay, yes, ma'am.
How did Mr. Miller come across your desk? I read that.
Okay.
And that specifically, but also just in general, how do cases that you are going to investigate become known? Is there some kind of database? I mean, is there a way that you're able to access?
That's a big question. So how did Mr. Miller come across my desk? How did we learn about that case in the first place? And then more generally, how do we learn about just traditional art crime cases in general? So the first part of that question, so Mr. Miller came to us from a tip, which, you might imagine the FBI gets a lot of tips every day. Tens of thousands a day we get. And there's a whole system within the FBI to matriculate those down to individual field offices and figure out where they go. I was at home having dinner with the family. I get a phone call from my boss who said, hey, this tip just landed on my desk. It's talking about some guy supposed to have some Native American stuff and some human remains. We're going to ship it off to Fish and Wildlife. unless you want to look at it. And I said, no, I'll put it on my desk. I'll look at it in the morning. And tug that little thread, and it just kind of exploded in front of me. So that's the kind of quirky answer to that. More generally, though, it's a lot of that. It's tips, right? We get most of our information from tips. You might think that a small team like the FBI's art crime team has time to sit down all day long and scour the art market and follow sales. We don't have time for that. So at the height, after I took over the program and really spent a lot of time building it and modernizing that program and dragging it into the light, and it wasn't a niche thing anymore. It's an official FBI program. At the height of the team, we had 23 agents working cases, and so at any given time, we were running about 260 cases. So we were pretty busy. So we didn't have time to do that. So we had to rely on tipsters and complainants and people that would call and notify us about problems. Yep, over here, and I'll get to the back in just a second, right here.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I know I've read about painters who do a painting and they'll sneak it into an art museum and hang it on the wall. Have you run across that?
That's the reverse, I guess, of what you'd be worried about.
That is a reverse, isn't it? So have we heard about painters, artists that will go in and sneak their works in? I can't say that I've heard about that specifically. So there are some artists, I'm not going to name any of them for liability purposes, but there are some living artists today that we were dealing with, and it's not uncommon. So you guys kind of understand if you're a well-known artist, you have students, right? That's pretty typical. You've heard the term, maybe some of you have heard the term, by the hand of the artist, or in the school of, right, the artist. These things are all important in the art world, and it's how we look at authenticity of a piece and all these things. But so you still have some living modern artists today that have students, and they'll have a studio, and their students are creating art that if it meets the standard, the artist will sign. And then it becomes, signed by the artist, maybe not by the hand of the artist, but signed by the artist. But if it's a blemish or if it's just not up to the standards, a lot of times they won't get signed and they just kind of go into the closet. So we've had some cases where artists would then come along later and get swooped up into a kind of a fraud scheme, and they would want to flood the market with pieces, and they would go back in and sign all of these blemished paintings and then put them into the market as by the hand. And it's all BS, and it's all fraud, and it's to drive value. So we have seen those cases. I wouldn't say none of my colleagues have ever seen that case. I've not seen it where they've tried to get it into a museum. In some shows, yes, we do see that from time to time where they'll pop a piece into a show, because that's how you drive value, right? You would get into a show, and the Salvador Mundi piece, right? We might talk about that one. How many shows that thing got put into before it got famous
for a while.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, in the back.
Yes, the law has been in effect for about 35 years, and can you tell me examples of what has been repatriated to these Native American tribes?
So NAGPRA, so that law has been in effect since 1990. So the question is, what has been repatriated back to the tribes? I can't speak to the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of objects that have been repatriated, because many have. So remember, NAGPRA is really intended for institutions, right? It's to govern how a museum or a university handles their collection and handles repatriation. In fact, NAGPRA was never written with law enforcement in mind. That was not the intent of Congress to regulate how the FBI handles it, because for us, it's evidence. That's a terrible word, and I hate that word. I talk about that a lot in the book. It's not evidence to us, but technically it's evidence, right? And so when we seize evidence, we have a whole other list of rules that we have to follow that dictate how we handle evidence and when we return it and all these things. And most of the time, it runs directly in contravention of NAGPRA. This is one of my criticisms about the law. So Congress didn't intend it to be for law enforcement purposes, but because the FBI is a federal agency, we meet the statutory definition, and so therefore we were subject to NAGPRA, and we had to do all kinds of things for that. So, from law enforcement, we gave back, well, out of Native American materials, we gave back probably close to 4,000 pieces out of the Miller case alone, and we're probably in the 8,000 or 9,000 piece range historically. But in the museum and academic world, the numbers are much higher. But there is so much work left to do. So many universities still have massive collections of ancestral remains, not just artifacts, but they have a lot of human remains. But it's a challenging topic because I don't know what the number is today. It changes just about every year. There's something like 584 federally recognized tribes. Think about that for a minute. All right, 584 federally recognized tribes, probably half that many that are not federally recognized. The numbers get quite high, and each one of these is a sovereign nation that are entitled to government consultations, right? That's their right. And so we have to do those consultations with those. But you can imagine how that gets challenging. Look at the United Nations in New York. How many countries make up the UN? Anybody know?
164 or something?
It's about right about that.
Yeah.
And have you ever, in the history of the UN, ever seen them agree unanimously on anything? Now multiply that by 5.
Yeah.
So it gets really challenging, right, to implement NAGPRA in the way it was supposed to be, because each of these sovereign nations, they have different views, right? They have different spiritual beliefs, and they have different religious practices and cultural practices, and sometimes they don't like each other very much, right? There's long-standing animosity between cultures and tribes, and these are all things that we're trying to navigate in a diplomatic, effective way to reach consensus. And the universities and the museums have to navigate these waters carefully, and it's just a really difficult, unwieldy process. I think the regulatory framework makes it 10 times harder than it should be, because the government stuck their nose in it. The government tries to dictate terms to everybody when really all we need to do is sit down and have some conversations. I just tell y'all, I talk about it a little bit in the book. We found that we were most effective in repatriating Native American cultural heritage outside the framework of NAGPRA. When I could, I shoved NAGPRA into the corner, and we wouldn't even talk about it. And we would just go and do it as evidence return. And I could give it back like that. If I went through NAGPRA, it would take years to give it back. It has to go through this whole it's a terrible, read the book. It's in there. It's terrible. And publishing in the Federal Register and doing all these notices and all this nonsense that you got to do, but it's just the regulatory framework. And some of it's there to protect the tribes, and it needs to be there, but then sometimes it complicates things. And so
About 2 years ago, by the way, it was beefed up, sort of rewritten. I did a story, if you want to go find it, and within that, as far as institutions, museums, guess which state has the most in those collections that have not been repatriated? Illinois, but Ohio's 2. So I think we have time for one more. Mrs. Curran, you've been waiting.
You talked about priceless and worthless. To me, if someone is stealing a very, very well-known piece of work, doesn't it become worthless? Because then how do they benefit from having that?
yeah,
That's in the book, too, by the way. You touch on that
that's
a
in
little
the
bit.
book, and I've spent the last 2 days talking about this ad nauseum over the Louvre heist, right? And if you steal a piece of art, a painting, a print, a work on paper, whatever it is, a sculpture, right? That painting has market value only based on what collectors are willing to pay for it, what its auction value is, or what a collector's going to pay for it. So if I steal it, how many of you dabble in the art market? You buy and sell. Any of you? Nobody? That's probably good. Look, here's how it works, right? If I've got a Monet painting, well, a couple of things have to happen. A, it has to have authenticity. It has to be original, authentic. It has to be what I say it is. Now, it can be a print. It doesn't have to be an original, but it needs to be authentic, right? Not a fraud. I have to have clean title before it can have any value. Because if I don't have the legal right to sell it, then it's worthless, right? And so that's what happens when thieves steal artwork. They steal a painting. Well, it might be an original Rembrandt. That's great. But you don't have title. So you can't sell it. It's not like you can take it down to Sotheby's and throw it into an auction because you don't have title. It's stolen, and everybody knows it's stolen. So do you think you can monetize the market value out of it? Let's say the painting hanging in the museum is worth $20 million, but you steal it. Is it worth $20 million now? No, because you don't have title. So what do? Well, you turn to the black market, and you sell it on the black market. But who operates in the black market? Other criminals. And what other criminal do you know that's going to give you $20 million for that painting because it's stolen? No one. And so you get pennies on the dollar for this thing, right? So these things traverse the market for pennies on the dollar. This is why they're not doing it much anymore. This is why they're now targeting gold and historic jewelry, because they have intrinsic value based on the rare metals and the precious gems. I can melt that stuff down and I get the gold weight. I can sell those diamonds off. I don't need it to have market value. I don't need it to have clean title. And this is why we're seeing this trend now. The thieves have finally gotten smart and they're stealing the right stuff. All right.
There you go.
Yeah.
I heard an audible gasp over here when you talked about melting down, so we'll close it up there. I know a lot of these folks want to get their books and get them signed, so thank you so much for being here. This was fascinating. Oh,
What?
you sent photos.
I did put up photos.
I did not know that. Oh, go for it.
All right, so a couple of photos, and I'll be brief, guys. I know it's getting late. You want to get books signed. So one of the things when we did this case, we got beat up a little bit in the press. You might imagine I got called everything. I was called a Nazi and all kinds of stuff because everybody's like, oh, the FBI is hassling this poor 91-year-old man and stealing his arrowheads. That's what they said about us. Now, listen, that's okay, right? It's okay. You can't be an FBI agent and be thin-skinned. It's fine. The public should challenge us and ask hard questions about why we do what we do. You might imagine that the community loved Mr. Miller. He was a philanthropist. He was a missionary. He paid to have a covered bridge restored. They loved him. He was a local hero, and everybody in the community knew he had this stuff. So they just couldn't comprehend how come the FBI would come in and take this poor old guy's collection. Well, no one in the community knew he had the remains of 500 dead people in his house. So you might imagine that when there's a vacuum of information, the public fills it, and it's normally with garbage. And that's what was going on in this case. So they didn't understand. That's a real reason I wrote the book. I want the public to understand. We didn't just go hassle this poor old guy and take his arrowheads. But I didn't care about the arrowheads. They're legal, usually. It's not entirely always true, but so we really kind of descended on his property. They talked about us looking like the Marines invading a small country, and no one stopped to ask us why. Well, I brought over 100 FBI people and academics and archaeologists and anthropologists, tribal representatives. I had a crowd this big operating at his house every day for 6 days. Where do you go to the bathroom? Where do you eat? How do you get in and out of the weather? Because it was cold, just like it is outside. How do I put this many people in his house and not destroy the home or destroy all the cultural property we're there to collect in the first place, right? So no one ever stopped to ask us why we were doing all of these things. It was a very complex process that we had to set up, and we had to be able to take care of his home. We didn't want to damage the home. Take care of him, his wife, their health, their dog. We took his dog for walks. We went and got their medicine at the pharmacy for them. We brought them food. We were doing all kinds of things to take care of it. And when we were done, you can imagine it was wet and muddy like it is outside. After 6 days, it was a mud pit. We hired landscapers, and we came in and resodded his yard, planted new trees. We're not there to destroy the property, right? We're there to do our job. And so the media didn't ask about any of that stuff, strangely. But these are just some of the photos of Mr. Miller's collection. As you can see, it's a bit staggering. Not all of this is illegal. Let's be clear. So he had 42,000 artifacts in his collection. We seized 7,000 of those. So that means we left 35,000 behind, right? Because we didn't have enough evidence to suggest that they were illegal. I'm not saying they were legal. I'm saying we didn't have enough evidence to seize them. So that is what it is. But yeah, so this was the largest single cultural property seizure, for sure in the FBI's history, I dare say in the U.S. government's history. I don't think any other agency's ever done anything this big.
When you did go through, I know you were tagging with colors, illegal, not illegal, possibly. What percentage were absolutely fine? Do you remember? The green tags.
Absolutely fine.
100% that you said these are not, these are legal.
10 to 15%.
Okay, so
It's pretty low.
Pretty low.
Much of it was questionable. But again, we could be here all night, guys, talking about the complex legal framework we have to. There's not one law that there are 15 laws that we're looking at. There are international treaties. Half of the collection was Native American, half the collection was from the rest of the world and all over the world. So we have to look at every one of those countries. We have to look at UNESCO treaty, the whole, it gets really complex. We're talking about Shipwreck Act, Endangered Species Act, NAGPRA, ARPA, National Stolen Property Act. We're looking at individual state laws. It gets really difficult, really complicated. So this is a really important repatriation we did in Haiti. So we gave back several hundred objects, and these were exquisite museum quality pieces. Taino material back to the country of Haiti. This was the very first ever repatriation and return of their cultural heritage from any country. No one had ever given anything back to Haiti before we did. We tripled the size of their national collection by doing this return. It was a very emotional event for them, as you might imagine. There were a lot of tears and hugs going around for them. But it scared the snot out of us, though, because, I mean, it's Haiti. You know, these poor guys, they just don't have a lot of infrastructure there. And so we show up. We've got 3 of these big 4-foot by 4-foot crates that have been all tightly packed, and they weigh a ton each. Each one of these crates is 2,000 pounds because most of this material is stone. We're expecting a forklift or something. They don't have anything. So these poor guys had to just go and manhandle these crates off the truck, and you're just like, oh, no. You know, but they did fine. They got it all out. Everything was great.
That's amazing. Wow.
This was a big repatriation to China. And so, you know, you guys know our relationship with China is difficult. And so this was, as the U.S. ambassador to Beijing described at the time, as did the Chinese government, this was the most positive U.S. to China interaction in over a decade. And they still talk about this repatriation in China today. Wow. This was very important to them. We gave back several hundred pieces to China.
Amazing.
That's it.
Okay.
All right, very good.
A great
Well, hey,
look
thanks,
into it.
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.